Margaret Theresa's body was never just hers. From the moment she was born, in the thick, damp winter of 1651, she was a piece of porcelain meticulously molded by invisible hands, a child who had barely uttered her first cry and was already promised to the political altar of degeneration. Her cradle was a golden tomb. She was born in Madrid into the sumptuous but silent Habsburg court, the daughter of King Philip IV and his own niece, Maria Anna of Austria. The blood that ran in her veins was the same blood that had circulated in vicious circles for generations. Grandparents, cousins, uncles, all mixed, distorted, repeated. The Habsburg name resonated like a sacred seal, but it carried with it the curse of the mirror, a lineage that looked only at itself until it shattered. Her mother, Maria Anna, was a broken woman even before she became a wife. She had been torn from her childhood and placed as the consort of a man who could have been her father, a man with a face lined with age, desperate to produce an heir after the deaths of nearly all his previous children. Maria Anna's womb became a factory of grief. Margarita was one of the few children who escaped an early death, but she did not escape her fate. The girl grew up surrounded by silence and eyes. Maids dressed her like a doll. Maids taught her to walk like a ghost. Every step Margarita took was watch-timed, rehearsed. But what was most striking was her small stature, her childlike face, even as the years passed, as if her body refused to mature. She was a living doll, a perpetual image of childhood for a world that saw only reproductive utility in her. Velázquez painted her with reverence. Las Meninas immortalized Margarita as the center of a universe of servants and artists, but that immaculate image hid the brutality of her life. Behind the bows, the frills, the white lace, there was a sickly body. Her spine was already bent, her bones fragile, her breathing shallow. No one dared say it, but everyone knew Margaret Theresa was yet another victim of the inbreeding that sustained the thrones of Spain and Austria. She was cheerful, they said, polite, submissive, graceful, but she was also exhausted. What can a child know about exhaustion? But Margaret knew. She knew the weight of being seen as an heiress, as the key to an alliance between twin branches of the same crumbling family tree. From the age of 3, her portraits were sent to the Holy Roman Empire as promises of fertility, not like sending love letters, but like sending samples of flesh. At the age of 12, preparations for the engagement began. At 13, there was already talk of the crossing. At 15, she set sail for Vienna. The wedding to Leopold I, her uncle and cousin, was celebrated with orgies of incense, gold, and mass. But when the doors of the bed closed, what remained was the body of a girl given to a man of 30. From that moment on, Margaret began to bleed, not just once a month. She began to bleed inside every day. Leopold was devout and cultured, but above all he was a Habsburg. And for him, as for all men of his lineage, Margaret was a breeder. What was called love was in fact the fulfillment of a macabre right to penetrate, to fertilize, to pray, and to repeat. Margaret's womb became an altar and a slaughterhouse. Her belly was filled with hopes that slowly died. Of the 6 pregnancies, she endured only 1 daughter survived. The rest were absorbed by the cold of the imperial corridors. The empress began to slowly decline. First came migraines, then fever, then vomiting blood, and finally fatigue. A fatigue so profound that it seemed ancestral. Her letters revealed a broken spirit, longing for Spain, loneliness, in the Hofburg Palace, the constant fear of dying in childbirth. Margaret began to walk with difficulty, to breathe with difficulty. The same body that had once enchanted artists was now falling apart under the eyes of helpless doctors. In the silence of the Viennese dawn, the empress curled up in her bed as if she wanted to fit back into the womb of a mother who had also been martyred. There was no warmth in the sheets, embroidered with gold thread, only the damp cold of Austria embedded in her joints, devouring her bones like a worm crawling inside. Marguerite was only 19 years old, but her body was that of an old woman. The servants whispered in the corridors, "She is wilting like the flowers that come from Spain and cannot withstand the climate." Inbreeding, which had given the Habsburg's power, was now exacting its price in blood interest. The deformed jaw, the feet that were too small, the aching back, all were symptoms of a family tree planted on incest. But no one dared admit it. At court they pretended that everything was normal, that frail empresses' cursed births and silent mourning were part of the glorious destiny of royalty. They pretended so much that they ended up believing it. Margarita did not speak of these pains out loud, but she wrote. Letters sent to her mother reveal a girl who missed playing with her brothers, walking in the gardens of the Alcazar, hearing the Spanish language. She felt like a prisoner, not of a palace, but of a destiny. And the cruelest thing was knowing that everyone around her accepted this imprisonment as necessary, as noble. Silence was her only inheritance, and it was also her sentence. Little Maria Antonia, her daughter, was the only joy she had left. But even that joy was tainted by omens. The girl was pale, sickly, too quiet. She had the same dull glow as her mother in her eyes, the same genetic makeup, the same future written in stone. Margarita knew she was creating a repetition, a daughter, to follow in the cycle of sacrifice. She wanted to protect her, but there was no way. In the Habsburg world, no woman was born for herself. All were made to be given away, used, forgotten. Margarita's health deteriorated dramatically in the months following her last birth. Her fever wouldn't go away. Her cough was constant. Sometimes she vomited pus, sometimes blood. The doctors diagnosed bronchitis, but there was something more. There was a failure that wasn't just in her lungs. It was in her soul. She couldn't get up anymore. She couldn't eat anymore. She couldn't cry anymore. When asked what she felt, she would answer, tired. That was all. And there was so much truth in that tiredness that no treatment could cure it. In the spring of 1673, Margaret stopped speaking. She spent her days staring out the window, breathing heavily, mumbling prayers that no one understood. At 21, she already seemed like a ghost of herself. The palace hushed up the rumors of her imminent death. They continued to organize balls, dinners, celebrations, as if ignoring it were enough to stop death, as if youth were enough to guarantee life. And then, on a silent night in March, Margaret was gone, without a cry, no visible agony. She simply stopped breathing. Her body, so small, so wasted, was hastily prepared for the wake. They dressed her in imperial regalia. They folded her hands, and they laid her in a coffin covered with symbols she never understood. A lifetime of dressing to please, and in death she was still adorned like a doll. At the funeral, everyone wept with composure. Speeches were read, masses were said, but none of these ceremonies could hide the fact that Margarita had died not of illness, but of excess. Excess of obligations, of impure blood, of forced silence, of early pregnancies, of blessed incest. It was a death foretold, a genetic prophecy, a child who was never allowed to be a child, a woman who never had the right to her own body. Leopold the widower remarried shortly afterward to another princess of the same lineage, because the ritual had to continue. The womb had to be replaced. The throne required more female bodies, more sacrificial births. And Marguerite's memory was slowly fading, replaced by portraits and titles. But what she left behind was not in the imperial archives. It was in the cracks in the mirrors, in the muffled sobs of the maids, in the eternal cold of the room where she wasted away. What no one said out loud was that Margaret Theresa was a victim not of a tragic fate, but of a deliberate choice, a choice made over centuries to maintain power at any cost, even if that cost was the physical and mental destruction of women like her, women who bled to keep castles standing, who slowly rotted so that kings could sit on golden thrones. Margaret's body after her death was sealed in a dark wooden coffin with Baroque details. Her face, covered by a veil of fine lace, was pale as marble, and her fingers, which had never held freedom, were now clasped around a silver crucifix, as if still asking forgiveness for a sin that was not hers. She was placed in the Capuchin crypt in Vienna, where emperors lie side by side as if time and flesh could be ordered even after death. But Margarita did not rest, not even there, because death does not erase what was written in the bones. The story of her body would continue in the following generations, in Maria Antonia, her daughter, in Maria Antonia again, her granddaughter, and in so many other descendants who would carry inside the silent cracks of degeneration. The deformed mouths, the fragile brains, the fatal births, the curse of the Habsburgs disguised as glory. Her daughter Maria Antonia married Maximilian II, Emmanuel of Bavaria, at a young age. She gave birth to a son, José Ferdinand, who was soon proclaimed heir to the Spanish crown. The plan was clear to perpetuate Marguerite's lineage, but the boy died at the age of 6, and his mother followed the same path as her grandmother: childbirth, illness, silence. She died young, forgotten. The women of this family did not grow old. They rotted early. They bloomed for a moment and then faded, as if the world had no room for the continuation of their pain. The causes of Margarita's death were always recorded as bronchitis or lung weakness, euphemisms that hid the truth. No one dared to write in the official records she died of incest, of genetic crossbreeding, of historical imposition, of being the daughter and granddaughter of the same man, of being the wife of her own uncle, of carrying in her ovaries the ghosts of an entire lineage, of being since birth a womb with an expiration date. And while she was dying, the halls were still filled with dancing. The court produced new portraits, new marriages, new girls prepared to repeat the cycle, because the system did not stop. It never stopped. Margaret was replaced like a candle that goes out and another one lights up. But no light could hide the smell of rot that was embedded in the walls, because there was something sick in the shine in the eyes of each royal child. There was something grotesque in the pride of keeping one's blood pure, and it was this imposed purity that years later would culminate in the birth of Charles II of Spain, Marguerite's half-brother, and also her daughter's cousin. Charles, the last Spanish Habsburg, was the living embodiment of decadence, deformed, mentally debilitated, infertile, sickly from birth. A king who could barely chew, who did not speak until he was 4 years old, who was incapable of governing or fathering an heir. He was the ultimate portrait of everything Marguerite had suffered. A throne sitting on the bones of women who bled. For nothing, Charles II was the direct product of the same lineage that produced Margaret Theresa. She did not live to see him, but he was the loudest echo of her tragedy. The child of incest, the child of the obsession with clean blood, he was a walking corpse, surrounded by priests who tried to exorcise the demon of his impotence. When he died, leaving no heirs, the Habsburg dynasty in Spain came to an end. But the cost of his existence had already been paid with Marguerite's youth, with her daughter's body, with the stillbirths of all the women in the family. What remains of Daisy are paintings that are still celebrated as masterpieces today, but none of them show what was invisible: the pain in her knees, the blood in her legs, the eyes that begged for help between childish smiles. Artists captured her appearance, but they never dared to paint what she really was: a lamb sacrificed in the name of an empire that was eating itself from within. And when you look at the portrait of Las Meninas today, it is impossible not to feel the weight of what is absent. The center of the composition is a child but a child adorned like an altar, surrounded by adults who orbit like satellites over a doomed star. She is there alive, but trapped. A girl among shadows, among eyes, among expectations. A prisoner dressed to seem free. Margaret Theresa's servitude was masked by brocades and satins. Each embellished dress, each ornate hairstyle, hid the brutality of a body prepared to be a showcase. The mirrors that surrounded her reflected only the perfection of the mold, not the crack that was deepening in silence. There was no room for complaints. There was no language to translate her pain into audible words within a world that only heard. Titles and crowns. Her moments of greatest freedom were the brief moments alone with her ladies, in waiting many of whom had come from Spain. In these secret moments, Margarita would laugh softly, tell childhood secrets, and mention forgotten games, as if she were trying to tear off the shell of the empress. But the sound of footsteps, or the creak of a door, was enough for her posture to stiffen, her smile to fade, and her eyes to darken again. The portraits commissioned for different European courts became increasingly misleading. In all of them, Margaret appeared healthy, with flushed cheeks, her waist cinched in by cruel corsets, her hair arranged in artificial curls. No canvas revealed what was behind it, the feverish sweat running down her back, her swollen ankles, her hands trembling with weakness. It was necessary to lie. The Empress's appearance was political propaganda, and like all propaganda, it was compromised by illusion. The imperial physicians, all men of prestige and arrogance, prescribed leeches, opium syrups, emetics, prayers, and fasting. Each treatment seemed like another punishment, but no one dared to question it. The illness was hers, the blame too, as if Margaret's frailty were a moral deviation, a character flaw, and not the tragic consequence of the most incestuous family tree in Europe. And even in the face of imminent decline, the Habsburgs continued to plan alliances. Margaret's death, for them, was not a catastrophe. It was merely a setback. Her womb had served its purpose. Her daughter was the new promise. And if Maria Antonia did not survive, another would be created. For these royal houses, girls were not individuals. They were bearers of fertility, reproducers of pacts, incubators of surnames. The cruelest thing was that even in the memoirs that were written about her, Margarita continued to be portrayed as sweet, loving, devout. A catalogue of obedient virtues, never rebellious, never questioning. Because official history does not accept women who break molds. Those who suffer in silence are easier to fit into the books. Those who shout are erased, but the echoes of her pain persist, in intercepted letters, in reports from servants, in medical notes, lost in the imperial archives. In them we find traces of a woman suffocated by her own fate who asked, albeit subtly, to be freed, not from the palace, but from the role imposed on her, the child-empress, the royal doll, the human offering. And what about marriage? Leopold, I considered one of the most pious emperors in history, was also an accomplice to the system that destroyed Margaret. His notes spoke of love, but his love did not prevent her from being consumed in lethal childbirth. His love did not protect her from the cycle. His love was the cruelest kind, the kind that says, "I love you," while tightening the noose around her neck. The Queen of the Holy Roman Empire died in Vienna, but true mourning remained in Spain. Her mother, Maria Anna, was one of the few who truly cried, not for losing an empress, but for recognizing in her daughter's death the same end that awaited her. Both victims, both pieces, both trampled by men who never understood what it is to carry within themselves the demands of an entire nation. The corridors that Daisy crossed with her silent steps still echo her presence. They say that on very cold nights the guards hear the sound of a young girl crying in the empty halls, not out of terror, but out of exhaustion, a tiredness of centuries. Because there is pain that not even death can silence. On the tomb of Margaret Theresa, there is no epitaph that tells the truth. No inscription reveals that there lies a girl transformed into a queen before she even learned to exist as a person. We do not read about her weakened bones, nor about the terror of childbirth, nor about her interrupted breath in the prime of her youth. Her name is followed by titles: Archduchess, Empress, Daughter of Spain. But there is no space for victim, nor for sacrificed, and much less for forgotten. Over the centuries, the image of Margaret Theresa has been transformed into art symbol mythology. Her face has become an icon, and her story, edited, softened, embellished, has been diluted in the veneer of European nobility. Paintings, busts, coins, everything perpetuates the figure of the Golden Girl, but no one shows the blood clotted between her legs, the silent weeping in the early morning, or the last time her breath trembled with fear. Perhaps most tragic of all is this: even in death, Marguerite continued to serve. She continued to be paraded, revered for the wrong reasons, loved by crowds who knew nothing of her pain. She was the portrait of a time, of a dynasty, of an art, but not of a woman, never of a woman, because to be seen as a woman, she would have had to have been allowed to live as one, and that right was taken away from her before she could even wish for it. The system that destroyed her did not end with her. It continued to operate in new courts, on new thrones, in new marriages. The names have changed, but the methods remain: alliance through procreation, blood as currency, silence as virtue. And if today we look back on the past and feel horror, it is because there is something in it that still pulses, something that was never fully buried. Margaret Theresa died of being useful. She died of being needed. She died of carrying the responsibility of maintaining an entire empire on her shoulders. But no one should die for being a daughter. No one should waste away for being born into the wrong frame. She was the decorative girl who rotted inside, the young womb offered in sacrifice to the altar of inbreeding. May your name not be remembered just for a painting. May it be remembered for everything that art does not show, for the smell of fever, for the coldness of marble, for the color of blood spilled in silence. Because in every royal portrait there is an invisible corpse, and sometimes it smiles. If you've come this far, it's because you felt it, because you heard what the books hide. So like this video, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss other dark stories like this one. Share it with those who still believe that royalty is synonymous with glory. Here we reveal what the portraits don't show. We give body to pain, a voice to the forgotten, and we unearth what the victors hid.